I'm just going to introduce you Richard and Tim. Richard's from AWL and Tim's from RSPCA. I'm not going to do long bios because you've got them there and I sent them to you last night. They've got a presentation for you, which we hope you enjoy. So I'm going to hand over to them. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Richard, that's Tim. Hope you're not reading my bio compared to Mark Laurie last week. It's nowhere near as experienced as him, so you have to bear with me on that one. First of all, thank you for your time. It's an important process, and we just want to thank you as well for putting your time into this. Our topic was around the reality of the problem, how it happens, why it happens, and our view on the solutions as animal welfare organisations. We'll give you an overview of what we do. We've got a few figures in there just to give you some idea of impact. Those figures are for the 13-14 year and they're combined AWL RSPCA figures as well, seeing as it's a joint presentation. Tim's just got a comment before we start.
Okay. Thanks everyone for giving up your Sunday and last weekend and everything else. I hope you're finding the process useful and you're equally overwhelmed with information as well, which is, it's a complex issue that we're dealing with. I'm sure you've realised that already, given the volume of information and the people that are coming to you. But I guess I did want to the difficulty we have in this day and age is information overload. There's so much information coming to you. There are so many people with different opinions and different data. My background is, I worked in finance for a very long time. I probably spent 10 or 15 years volunteering at animal shelters before I joined the AWL in New South Wales as their CEO, which I was there for 2 years, and I've been here for 2 years. So a lot of what we do and a lot of what we're saying to you comes from a very long-standing experience background about what works and doesn't work and what the issues are and what we see the solutions are. So it's not guesswork. Our rehoming was up 45% last year because we put programs in place to make that happen, because we believe in rehabilitation and rehoming of animals, but we need to manage the numbers that come to us. So when we're talking about the solutions, it's not because we have an uneducated view. We're talking about the problem as it affects us and as it affects the animals. And if you take anything away from today, from our presentations, there are two really big ticket things that we can do that will have the biggest bang for your buck impact on animals coming in, animals euthanized, and animal welfare. One is breeder licensing and registration, which is not subject to this, but it is something that's being looked at the moment by the government and the Department of Environment and Dogcat Management Board. The problem with breeding at the moment is anybody can breed animals and sell them, and you have no traceability back to where the parents are. So if you're a member of the public, you're wanting to do the right thing, adopt an animal from an ethical breeder, you have no opportunity to do that at this point in time. You've got absolutely no idea where that puppy or kitten has come from, and our system's set up so that you have no traceability. Breeder licensing and registration will do that as long as it's properly structured and as long as there's good enforcement that allows us to find out where the breeders are, because we just don't know. The second thing is desexing. Now, what we're going to ask you to do is to weigh up the broader animal welfare benefits versus individual animal owners who say, well, I'm not having you come anywhere near my dog's genitals. But from my perspective, that's not a priority for me. If somebody's offended that they're going to have a dog that's desexed, I really don't care. At the end of the day, the number of animals that come through here and the number of animals die far outweighs any concerns that any individual pet owner has about whether they're entitled to have a desexed or undesexed animal. The number of litters that come into us, planned or unplanned, is enormous, and we have to deal with it, and it's the animals that suffer. And so if I can give you two things to take away, that are going to have biggest bang for your buck. Desexing is one, and breeder registration and licensing is another.
Okay. With that intro, last Saturday we had Dr. Mark Laurie present very well to the group, and he mentioned these two strategies, and we support that. And that is, in order to reduce the euthanasia of unwanted dogs and cats, which is really to reduce the unwanted dogs and cats in the first place, is twofold. First of all, to reduce incoming. Seems obvious, reduce incoming to pounds, shelters, councils and vets, because we also talked about the fact that we are obviously two agencies that deal with this problem, but a lot of people will take their pets to vets as well to deal with these problems. And secondly, to increase the outgoing, so that's through the adoptions and reclaiming and rehoming. In terms of strategy one, in terms of addressing why, we're saying where they came from, so we'll give you some indication of where the animals are coming from. And secondly, how to reduce those incoming numbers. In relation to strategy two with the outgoing, we're just going to talk about how we do that, so you get an idea of how we do the rehoming process. And also there was a question last week we picked up on who pays for what and so forth. We'll talk a little bit about that. We're trying to highlight the impact with a few numbers, but they're combined figures to give you some context. And one thing I just want to note is that when you might get other presenters who will talk about comparisons and figures, and this state does this, or this organisation does the following. You've got to ask a few questions when you look at, especially outgoing euthanasia figures, because you've also got to ask the question around, is that organisation providing a pound service? Was it a third party that was then outsourcing the euthanasia, and were those figures recorded? There are different laws in every state. The intake policy is also very different as well with organisations. So when you're looking at outgoing figures, you've got to ask questions around what were their incoming policies and strategies as well, and that will become evident as we get going. Okay, so source number one, incoming, stray dogs. We're generally talking about the 80-20 principle here to keep things simple, so we're generally talking about owned dogs. In terms of impact between the two organisations in South Australia for that given year 13-14, we're talking just short of 6,000 stray dogs. And when we're saying stray, they're the lost, wandering at large, generally collected by council animal management officers or authorised persons, as we refer to them. Sometimes by the public, so someone might find a dog, takes it into either RSPCA or AWL, and then we let the council know, because we need to do so as per the Dog and Cat Management Act. And in terms of terminology, to help you as well, you'll hear the word pound, shelter, rescue. So generally when we talk about pound, we're talking about the 72-hour mandatory holding period in South Australia. The dog is impounded. After that period, they would then sort of transfer into the shelter. Whereas with cats, there's no mandatory holding period, so they generally come in and say they come into a shelter. And then there's rescue groups who are not mandated by any laws generally, who would either be animal might be transferred from one of our organisations to a rescue group. They might have a speciality in a particular breed or particular cat or dog, and they have a rehoming process that they are focusing on. So we'll do transfers out to them as well. So there is some terminology differences there. And we're obviously going to take questions at the end, but we'll keep going through. Source number two. Stray cats and kittens, generally unowned. There's a caveat to that comment in that there is a mix of owned and unowned, but generally cats won't have any identification. So a cat will come in, and we say it's unowned because there's no microchip, there's no collar, and we do get situations where you can see people have taken collars off, there's a collar mark, and they've caught someone's cat and they've brought it in and it's unowned. Obviously it's illegal to do so, to trap an owned cat and without trying to find the owner. However, people do that. Unfortunately, people don't like cats. And so they're trapped, they're put into traps, they're taken to us or the RSPCA, and often the surrenders, these are coming in as unowned, but they are surrenders disguised as found. I found this litter of kittens in the road or what have you, because they don't want to take any ownership of the fact that their cats have kittens, and I just found them. So we go, okay, here we go. So again, we're talking just over 8,000 in that category. For the year 13-14 for 1 year, yeah. And that's July to June. Okay, source three. There's three sources mainly. And we're talking owner surrender. So impact here, 1,700 dogs, 2,500 cats generally. Now, they're not, we've got some partly anecdotal, partly evidence recorded in our shelter management systems, which we operate the same system. So there's ways of recording why people would surrender. It's not made particularly easy. Tim will talk about that as well. So we do ask questions and we try and give solutions. The top reasons given, people moving, Now the moving could be into states, they're moving into rental property, rental strata title or what have you does not permit pets, which is another thing we're working on as organisations. Also includes people going to nursing homes, hospitals. Again, that's something we're working on with various different residential care facilities to try and improve that, but it's one of the top reasons. Wrong decision is another one. Too many pets, thought I wanted another pet, realised I've got too many, can't handle it, and bring it into one of us. Given by a friend or relative, that also includes a situation where a relative may pass away, and maybe a grandmother, and they had a cat, and they give it to someone else in the family, and then they try and look after it, and then realise it's not working out, so they'll surrender that animal. Financial, unable to keep purely from financial reasons, and often, and we're talking about this before outside. We've got to highlight the fact that just because an animal comes to a shelter, RSPCA or AWL or even a rescue group, they're normally good animals. They're not damaged goods. The situation has changed to one situation that's beyond their control. So these are the ones that are very easy to rehome generally because they're socialised, they've been with other families, and obviously we've worked really hard to get them into another home. So sometimes relinquishing, there's a lot of stigma around that, and we sort of say, well, look, we'd rather get this pet into another home where it can be looked after, where someone does have the finances to do it. Also relationship breakdown. Partners come together, they've both got pets, or sometimes, it may not be breakdown, but they come together and realise their pets don't get on, even though they do. So, and also just in relation to this, we're fortunate in this state that both RSPCA and AWL have what we call open admission policies, or sometimes referred to as non-selective intake. So we have obviously a certain level of capacity to care. You couldn't possibly just double the number of animals coming in overnight and then guarantee the same level of care to those dogs and cats. So subject to the capacity to care, we don't refuse an animal coming in either. So it's a very difficult thing to manage from a management perspective, but it's worth noting, and I mentioned before about comparisons of figures, there are a lot of animal shelters and organisations that are not open policy. They will refuse if they can't take, or they don't want to deal with the outcome, which would be euthanasia, then they just won't take them in the first place. So it is worth noting that when you're looking at figures, you have to look at the intake policies of the organisations. Okay, unplanned litters sort of goes without saying. Now this could result in giveaways, and these figures would be included in both the stats for stray and owner surrender. So, and obviously unplanned litters is a big component of the discussion around mandatory desexing. So I think that's sort of fairly obvious. And also Tim's just going to talk a bit about the injured and ill, because that's more an RSPCA function than ours.
Yeah, thanks Richard. So probably this is a reasonable point there's probably one key difference between the work that we do and the work that AWL does, and that's around inspection and rescue. So we're not, but our inspectors are authorised under the Animal Welfare Act, so we have the same powers as SA Police. So there are two enforcement agencies under the Animal Welfare Act, which is different to the Dog Cat Management Act. The Animal Welfare Act is more about cruelty and ill-treating animals. So we employ 8 inspectors to do that work, and we also employ 5 rescue officers to basically fill the gap between animals that are stray and wandering and animals that are injured. Because what will happen in some council areas is some councils will respond to injured animals, others won't. So you may have a dog, for example, that's wandering in a particular suburb. If somebody calls council, they're going to pick it up. If that same dog gets hit by a car, there are some council that will say, well, it's not a problem now, because there's actually a clause in the Animal Welfare Act which says if you hit an animal with your car, you need to notify the police or the RSPCA within 24 hours. Now what that is a notification. I don't even know what's in the Act, it's pretty silly. But some councils say, you see, injured animals are the responsibility of the police or the RSPCA. Now that's not what that's about. It is about owned animals being injured, but there are councils that will fob that responsibility off. So we employ 5 rescue officers to fill that gap where there are councils that won't do that work. And it's very expensive for us to do that, but if we don't do it, it just doesn't get done. Now, not every council is that way, but there are enough of them that are. So we have to employ 5 full-time rescue officers to do this work. So to give you an idea, last financial year, we took in just over 1,700 injured and ill animals, and every single one of them needed veterinary attention. That was our rescue officers and our inspectors took in just shy of 1,000 animals, which we either seized from people or that we convinced them to surrender. We had about 6,000 cruelty reports, 5,000 cruelty reports last year, which was up 30% from the year before, and about 3,000 ambulance call-outs for our rescue officers, which was up about 20%. So these animals do come in. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of expense to do it, but somebody needs to do it. So cost-wise, we don't get any funding for our rescue officers. Probably costs us almost $1 million to run that service, but it's a gap in the animal care area that isn't being filled by anyone else. In terms of the inspectors, it costs us about 2.4 million to run that service. We do get $1 million from the Department of Environment to do that, but it costs us more than twice that to actually manage that. And we would run, out of 5,000 cruelty reports, I think we'll do about 60 prosecutions this year, which largely involves us trying to get, there's a deterrence aspect to that, but there's also an enforcement aspect. If somebody's demonstrated they can't care for animals that are going to be deliberately cruel to them or neglectful, we need to seek a court order making sure they can't do it again. We have to take them to court to get a court order to stop them owning animals, and then we get to revisit them to make sure they don't have them. Sometimes there's mental health involved, sometimes there's not. But the cost of all of this it's expensive. So this is where we're coming from. There is an animal welfare impact from all of this work, and there is a financial impact. So just from the shelters, ignoring the rescue officers and inspectors, costs us just shy of $4.5 million to run our shelters last year. We took into care just over 10,000 animals, which was 2,000 more than the year before, and we ran a loss of about 1.3 million overall. The cost of running our shelters was about 4.5 million, and we had about 1.3 million in income from adoptions and councils and other things. So we're running a net loss of 3 million just on the sheltering, and that's the financial burden that falls on the South Australian community who donate to ourselves and to AWL to actually do that work. So it's you guys that are paying for it. We're doing the work. We need to work really hard to do what we can to improve those outcomes for animals, but also to reduce that income. It's really important. So it's just not manageable if we don't do anything about the number of animals that are coming in. And just focusing on reducing income for a minute, and we'll go to the improving outcomes for animals, which is a separate thing. So there's probably 4 or 5 key things here that we probably need to mention. Another thing I mentioned to you may have discussed this, is the availability of rental accommodation for pets. It's not up there, but it is one of the key reasons why people surrender pets, and it's a key reason why people are unable to adopt pets in the first place, is lack of availability of rental accommodation when it comes to being allowed to have a pet. Now, we've done quite a bit of work around this. We've spoken to the Real Estate Institute, and originally we sort of had various perceptions as to why this happening. One is strata. There are all sorts of strata rules around having pets. In New South Wales and Victoria, they're actually looking at the default strata laws that they're introduced for new strata to be allowing pets, and then the owners are always free to change that. But your default used to be no pets, and then you had to change to pets. I'm not quite sure what the situation here is, but the more we can do to encourage, particularly apartment strata companies, to allow pets, the better. And the other is access to landlord's insurance. Now, one of the concerns that landlords have is they think that pets are going to damage their house. And what you can't get at this point in time is landlord's insurance that gives you more than $1,000 coverage for damage by a pet. So that's the thing that bothers a lot of landlords. They're thinking, well, I like dogs and cats, but I'm not going to pay for damage to my house if, a cat or a dog damages my floorboards or whatever it happens to be. So we're talking to a lot of insurance companies about seeing whether we can change it, seeing if we can get that improved. But that will be a key thing as well, if we can actually manage that. In terms of these things up here, identification returns are a really key thing. I think Richard mentioned to you the reclaim rate on dogs is quite high. It's sort of 50-60% of the ones that come in. So when you look at the stats of our family, like 10,000 animals came in, 4,000 went home to their owners, the rest we have to manage. But the more we can identify them, the better. So the reclaim rate for dogs and cats, 50-60%. Oh, sorry, for dogs and puppies. For cats, 3%. That is the reclaim rate for cats that come into our care, excluding owners' surrenders, because obviously we know who owns them. And that is because they're just not identified. So the microchipping recommendations that the government is introducing in terms of change to the Dog Cat Management Act, we very much support. The more animals who are microchipped, the more that they're able to go home to their owners immediately. Because animal management officers, if they pick up an animal, they'll scan them. If they're chipped, they'll take them home. They don't even come to us. That's the ideal scenario. If they're home, they shouldn't be going to near a shelter. They should just go straight home. So whether it's collars and tags or microchips, the more we can do to encourage or potentially compel people to actually identify their animals, the better. The unknown animals it doesn't address, but the owned animals it will. We do a lot of work around letting people know what animals come in, so we use the Sheltermate database, so we've set up an auto feed whereby as soon as an animal comes into our facility, a photo is taken, and as soon as we create a profile in our database, in our impounded animals area of our website, that profile gets created straight away. So it's an auto feed onto our website so people can see. And at the end of every day, we send an email off to the Lost Dogs of Adelaide and Lost Pets of South Australia Facebook pages, who have between them have about 80,000 supporters. So they can see every day there's an RSPCA album, these animals came in today, and they do a lot of matching with the no pets. There's a lot of good work done by those groups. But the more we can do to get people to identify their pets, the better. The sexing we'll obviously talk about a little bit later and on its own. Breeder licensing I mentioned to you before. You may have seen, for those of you who watched tonight, there's a chap that we're prosecuting now for the 4th time who's a puppy broker. And the model a lot of pet shops and online sellers of puppies in particular use is to use brokers or to use intermediaries whereby you have to go to someone's house and, here's a puppy. No idea where it came from, and as a community we don't require those people to actually tell anybody where those dogs are. So we raided a puppy farm in the Adelaide Hills about 18 months ago. We took 150 dogs and puppies out of that place. She'd been there for about 5 years. Council didn't even know she was there because she was down a sort of private road up the back, and she was selling through a puppy broker to pet shops in Adelaide, Darwin and Perth. So it's so profitable, we're actually flying puppies to Perth and flying them to Darwin to sell them there. And these are pet shops that will say, we don't support puppy farms. Well, they do. I know they do, and I'm telling you they do. And when pet shops tell you that they don't support puppy farms, it's garbage. And they have absolutely no way of providing that guarantee or making that assertion, because I'm telling you they do it. Pet shops who sell puppies and kittens, depends on where they get them from. We work very closely with Pet Barn and Pet Stock, which are fantastic groups. So they don't sell animals from breeders. All they do is rehome rescues, particularly Pet Barn. We have a national partnership with them. They rehome cats and kittens for us, and we've just gone past nationally our 10,000 cat and kitten rehome through Pet Barn. So that's a fantastic partnership. But that's a way of showing you there is a model for pet shops to not sell animals where they're very profitable. You've all seen Pet Barns and Pet Stocks. They're huge. And they're very profitable businesses. They do not sell animals other than rescues. So when pet shops tell you they have to sell animals to survive, it's rubbish. It's just they don't want to go down that path because it's easy money. The real big problem here is we don't know where these breeders are. We raided that puppy farm 18 months ago. She'd been there for 5 years. We've now stopped her, but how many animals have to suffer in the meantime? And I was there that day. We did photos. It's the worst place I've ever been in my entire life in terms of how those animals were treated. There were cages that hadn't been cleaned for feces for 3 months. The dogs standing up in the corner trying to get away from the 4-4 feces, and those puppies were going to pet shops in Adelaide, in Darwin, in Perth, and we absolutely need to know where these people are. Nobody has a right, as far as I'm concerned, to breed animals and then not take responsibility for that animal's welfare. There is no entitlement for people to be breeding animals. I don't really care whether they think that that's something that they are entitled to do. If you're making money off the back of animals, you need to be responsible for their welfare, and there needs to be some oversight to make sure that is happening, and that's what breeder registration and breeder licensing is all about. They'll cry and scream about it because they just don't want people to know where they are or how they're making their money, or have anybody standing over the shoulder to make sure animals are being looked after. And there's some very good breeders out there, and there are some god-awful ones, but we can't differentiate between them because we don't know where they are, because there is no requirement for that to happen. So as I mentioned, that's a super important part of what's happening at the moment. So that's not necessarily something that you guys need to introduce, but I'm explaining to you why it's important. Training containment is another one. Part of the reason we receive stray and wandering dogs, and surrendered dogs in particular, is that people aren't required to learn about dog behaviour when they adopt the dog. They're not required to do puppy training, they're not required to understand how dogs interact with each other, what good social behaviours are, how to train. So I'd be really interested, and we looked at this in New South Wales, was it when I was there, at people who adopt puppies in particular, and you've got to start somewhere. Councils encouraging or possibly even requiring people to actually do puppy training at that point in time, because the more a dog is able to learn at an early age how to be social with people, how to be social with other dogs, and potentially with cats and other animals, fewer problem behaviours you're actually going to have. We get a lot of unsocialised dogs and puppies that come in. There's nothing wrong with them, it's just nobody's ever shown them what a social behaviour is. It's like a child, you know, if you let them just run around the suburb for a couple of years, well, they'll just figure out off their own bat exactly what it is that they're going to do. But if nobody's provided them with any sort of guidance to say, well, this is how you interact with other children, this is what appropriate social behaviour is. There's very positive reinforcement ways to do that, but people aren't required to do it. So if there's ways and means that we can do that, it's really important. Containment is another one as well. We'll come across with cats. There are ways and means with netting and outdoor runs, and there's a thing called an ocelot that I'd be interested you to have a look at. It's actually a thing you can put on top of your fence to stop cats jumping in and out. So there are constructive ways that we can talk about cat containment, but of course it doesn't address the unowned and semi-owned cat issue. That's more about owned cats. So when it comes to reducing incoming, there are all sorts of initiatives that are constructive, but it needs to be cooperative with owners, and people need to understand the reasons behind it, and what's a constructive way to go about it.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, so this has been talked about already, targeted programs and also collaboration. So a lot of the stuff that Tim has talked about, our organisations couldn't do if we didn't collaborate already. So again, this is still part of the overall reducing of incoming. We feel that legislation is crucial to this. So, for example, if you didn't have strong connections between our organisations and the Dog Management Board and the state government and future laws and so forth, you know, this would be very hard for us to do. We also collaborate with various things, so there's standards around standards of care, sheltering, the way we should operate, education programs. Tim's already talked about money and the cost of things, so we collaborate with corporations in terms of fundraising, so there's a lot going on there. Adoption programs, again, organisations like Tim said, Pet Barn and Pet Stock, that will only rehome animals from the rescue group on RSPCA or AWL. So we collaborate with them to make that happen. So, and also reclaiming, obviously, we have to work with councils. In particular with targeted desexing, you hear a lot about, oh well, such and such vet can do it for $50 or whatever. It's just not a responsibility of vets. If we're going to talk about low-cost desexing or early-age desexing, or in particular the cost aspect, because a lot of this is going to be around cost, it has to be a collaborative approach. It has to be with local authorities, and we talk there about both local government, state government, working with the veterinary profession in general, the education and welfare groups. So where you can have a targeted, if say we need to target a particular area, then you work with the vets in that area, you work with the owners as well. They have to collaborate, they have to come to the party as well and provide some funds, albeit reduced. The vets will give a 20% discount or whatever they can provide, but they can't do it for $50, that's rubbish. So we all have to basically chip in to do that. Then there's also a bit of talk, you probably had talk about trap, neuter, return and this sort of thing. Again, they all have their merit, they have to be evidence-based, and again, they're targeted as well. So they couldn't operate without collaboration. You couldn't just say this group of cats would have to be desexed and returned to a particular community. That has to be in collaboration with that local community, with the people that are going to manage that group, with welfare groups, and with local government. You can't just do it in isolation. So collaboration in general, we're just talking about things that reduce incoming and successful strategies, is crucial to what we do. So something you can't mandate for collaboration, unfortunately, but you know, it's just common sense. Okay, so strategy 2, on to that one now, increase outgoing. So an obvious one here is the reclaim by owner. So Tim's already mentioned the figures. So for that particular year, we're talking about dogs being 64% reclaimed by their owner, and just for 3% for cats. Again, we talk about the fact that they're not identified, so we can't get them back to their owner because we don't know who the owner is. Obviously, what helps is identification. So permanent identification through the chip definitely helps. Registration, where that applies for cats, in some councils that already applies. There's about half a dozen at least in South Australia. And obviously for dogs. What also helps, talks about lost pets, Adelaide lost dogs. There's social media, websites, council, matching services where we match up the lost dogs to the information we have when they come in. Council collaboration, of course. The animal management officers, a lot of proactive councils, they've got their authorised persons will scan the chip, and if they can see the dog lives around the corner, they just take it straight home. That obviously is a huge benefit for the dog, and it doesn't get impounded overnight, and there's extra costs involved to the organisations to look after the dog, and also there's a higher chance it's going to be reclaimed because it's back to its owner. And over to Tim, who's going to talk about the other side of increasing the outgoing.
Yeah. And I'll sort of just preface that by saying I think we're running slightly behind, and that's probably because I talk a lot, so sorry about that. It's a subject that we're all passionate about. There's a lot of information that we're trying to convey in a short period of time, so my apologies. We'll try to finish up at 10:02, so we've got at least 10 minutes for questions. And then are we mingling at lunchtime so people could ask us questions then as well? So, oh, as well, okay. Great, lots of check, but we'll try to finish up by 10:02. So I'll go through this pretty quickly. There's a hell of a lot of work that goes in on our part and AWL's part and every other shelter in managing animals when they come and getting them out. We employ 4 full-time vets and 4 full-time vet nurses. We dissected 3,500 animals last year. All our animals are dissected and microchipped and vaccinated before they go out, but that means they weren't when they came in. So when we're talking about managing owners, we're talking about animals that are not identified, not dissected, not chipped, not vaccinated, and we're having to do that work. So all of the solutions that we're looking to provide are partly about owners taking responsibility. So if they do have to come to us, ideally that hasn't happened, and if that has happened already, and if it has happened, it might actually impact whether they come to us at all. So we employ 4 full-time behaviourists, 8 full-time veterinary staff. We have to do the veterinary and behavioural rehabilitation. We do a lot of work around injured and ill animals. We do a lot of work around genetic conditions, where we do a lot of work around dissecting. We'll do knee operations, amputations, collar wounds, animals hit by a car. So all these things combined are sort of expensive, but it needs to be done. In a lot of cases, these animals have been let down by somebody. We need to be the group, the safety net, to make sure that whatever their circumstances were the first time around, we get them the right outcome the second time around. We have a very large foster care program. We put over 2,000 animals through foster care last year. It's a really big part of what we do. And these are for orphans, pregnant animals, mums with babies, older animals, timid and stressed animals who don't do well in a shelter environment. So we literally have, as well as our Lonsdale, Port Lincoln and Wales shelters, we have another virtual shelter out in the community, which is 300 to 400 foster carers looking after animals for us in a home environment where it's easier for them to get that one-on-one TLC. We can rehome kittens in about a week. The hard bit is getting to the point where they're healthy. If we take in a litter of 2-week-old kittens, they have to go somewhere for 10 weeks to get them up to weight, to get them vaccinated, get them healthy. We can dissect them at about 1 kilo, which is 10 to 12 weeks. And so we dissected 3,500 animals last year. We didn't have any problems with any of it. So when you're talking about early age dissecting, there's sort of all sorts of studies about maybe it's a problem for puppies. We never see that. We dissect a hell of a lot of animals, and it's expensive work. And adoption promotions, I'll just quickly go through this as well. We're really conscious that we compete with pet shops and breeders. So when you're talking about getting animals out, it is also about promoting your animals well. So if you're looking at, we have about 10 volunteer photographers. Digital photography is a fantastic thing, but we're in a very, very visual field. We have to use social media, we have to use our online presence. And this is what the photos used to be, you know, an impounded animal on the left, what it used to look like. The animal on the right is what we need to show people, to say we've got great pets. Our pets are the sorts of pets that you want to bring home and introduce to your family and come and have live with you. So all these photos are done by volunteer photographers, and it's so accessible now, digital photography, we have to make use of that. And we have to recognise that we're in a marketing game and we are competing with breeders and pet shops. So it's really important. And there are so many volunteers now, you know, young people. I'm almost 50, so when I grew up, we had to, you know, get everything done at the news agent, and then you get your prints back and you throw 10 of them out, and one's any good. Digital photography is an amazing thing. Sorry, Matt, let me just go back here. We work really, really hard in getting animals out, but we have to do something about how many come in, because we literally can't do it all on our own. So that's why all these things are incredibly important.
Just a quick point on the mentioned again last week about compassion fatigue with employees. It is a big problem, huge problem. About 50% of employees in the shelter environment that are exposed to euthanasia and of animals experience some form of post-traumatic cycle of stress disorder. There have been suicides, hard to relate. There's a few studies. I've sent the details through to two M's over there. There's one done in Queensland, only in 2014, Dr. Linda Tolberg, around the cost to people and what organisations need to do. So it is a huge cost. And also Flinders are doing one right now. Nick Taylor is doing a study which we're participating in, and those results will hopefully be forthcoming fairly soon. And I'm not sure if Nick can be contacted on some sort of results so far of how that's going.
And these concerns are genuine. We have to run, as does AWL, what's called an employee assistance program with psychologists being available. And I've been at RSPCA for 2 years. I got here in 2013. We had 2 suicides down at our Lonsdale shelter in 2011. The impact on people having to deal with these animals and bonding with these animals and being uncertain about the outcome for these animals can be quite traumatic for people. So it's yet another reason why we need to manage the number that are coming in.
So, while we're all here, mandatory desexing, we left this to last. So, we thought there's some points to consider which we've just got up there, which you can see for yourself. So, in terms of laws, regulations, we're all used to laws and so forth, but we feel that we do so much in the space of education. We're always talking about what you can do, what you should do, and all these things we've talked about here. There has to be some foundation laws around that, because it's very hard to continually educate unless someone said, well, if it's not that important, otherwise they would have made it law. So, so we all support desexing. We know that it reduces shelter intake and responsible pet ownership. So at what point and when and how do we legislate this? This is really the question. Needs to be achievable. Again, Mark Laurie was talking about this. Needs to be targeted. We've talked about, there's a lot of talk about unowned cats and kittens. Initially, if you brought in desexing for owned cats, it wouldn't have a big impact on the unowned population, but over time it would. So you're talking 10 years plus. So you need to have the foresight to make decisions now for the future benefit. Tim's just going to talk about what we feel is our view of the
so I guess one of the things that wasn't really done for you guys was to define what mandatory desexing actually means. Because from our perspective, there's probably 2 different ways to look at it. One is the avenue that WA went down a number of years ago with cats, which was to say, right, for a certain point in time, every cat out there has to be microchipped or desexed. Now that's problematic. It is, because you've got an awful lot of animals out there who may not necessarily need to be desexed. If I've got a retired person with 2 undersexed cats that are indoor all the time, they're not a problem. You know, they're 2 female cats, they're 10 years old. If that lady can't afford to have them desexed, and we bring in legislation to say you must desex your pets, highly likely she's going to surrender them to us or to AWL. Now, they're not necessarily the animals that we're after, and it's very, very difficult to retrospectively turn around to everybody who's already got a pet and say you must have your animal desexed, because A, some people aren't going to want to afford it, B, some people aren't going to want to do it, and then that becomes a distraction from the reason why you're doing it in the first place, and 3, if you don't provide low-cost opportunities to have those animals desexed, people may want to comply and they just can't do it. So what we're better off doing, and what is still described as mandatory desexing, but what we would support is introducing desexing of newly sold, adopted, transferred, whatever, puppies and kittens from a point in time in the future. So for example, you might say from 1 January next year, every animal that is sold, adopted, transferred must be desexed at that point in time. And the onus then is on the breeder or the person who's actually selling or transferring that animal, not on the general population. You still need to try to encourage people who've already got pets to get them desexed, and that's a separate issue. We really need to provide low-cost desexing opportunities for people, and that is, we're quite prepared to do our bit, but it needs to be in conjunction with government and with councils to provide that to people who've already got pets. But to provide a service whereby anybody who's selling, transferring, breeding a pet has to have it desexed at that point, that is a much better system, because you know it's happening. It's happening. There's a phase-in period, there's a transition period. People know that when you're acquiring a pet in the future that it's going to be desexed. From our perspective, there's absolutely no reason for somebody to own an undersexed pet unless you are a registered breeder. If you're not a registered breeder, there's absolutely no reason to have one, because it just creates all sort of behavioural problems, and it creates all sort of unwanted litters, and we're the ones who have to cope with it, and it's the animals that suffer. So there are people that will say, I'm entitled to own an undersexed cat or an undersexed dog. I have no sympathy for that whatsoever. And in fact, if bringing this in offends a few people, I'd rather offend them and have better animal welfare outcomes.
Just to add to that, in terms of how this all fits in with all the other pieces of legislative change and the table at the back there are the people that have to deal with this. The feedback on the breeder code, what we've given as AWL anyway, is that it's quite easy to put in place, make links between the breeder code of practice and the management of that through the registration, the proposed registration process, and you could quite easily put in place, as part of that requirement, to have the desexing on the sale and transfer of puppies through the breeder registration and the breeder licence. Registration and clinical practice. So in terms of how you could do this with puppies and kittens, it's fairly, in our view, fairly straightforward. It just becomes, you know, the lawmakers over there to work it out. But there is a way. It's not impossible. Whereas if you try and make it mandatory right now, for the current population of dogs and cats, that's a bit trickier to do. But there is a process, because you're going through a new transfer. There's a process you're going through. You can't sell an animal unless it's got a registration. You have to advertise it, for example, and part of that is to show that you've got the desexing done, or a commitment to do so. So it could be a prepaid commitment, and that can be done, because there'll be arguments about the age, obviously, and vets need to have their say in terms of the condition of animals, and you're always going to get that. So they're never going to come up with an agreed age for all populations. So I think that's
so probably maybe next one.
So we just wanted to thank everyone for their commitment to this. This is obviously a challenge that we face all the time, but we really want to thank you for your time, because it's a very important topic. So thank you very much.